Hello everybody, welcome back and happy Tuesday. Thank you yesterday for watching the video about the Federal Reserve, just learning more what it is as an institution and what it does. Today we're going to dive deeper into the three tools that they have that they can use to help stabilize or control the economy. In the same way that fiscal policy was controlled by the government and they could control government spending and taxes, monetary policy is controlled by the Federal Reserve, and they have three tools. That's what we're going to go into today. But first, before we go into any of those, I want to define the term interest. I'm not sure how much you know about this, so I think it's important to define this before we move on. Interest is just this idea that if I loan you money or something, I know that you're not going to pay it back right away. So I might loan you $10 and say, hey, for every day that you're late, for every day after that you don't pay me back, you owe me 10 cents more. So if you pay me the next day, it's $10.10. If it's 2 days later, it's $10.20. Making a little bit of money for me, and I'm making sure that you're accountable to actually pay back my money. And this idea of interest should be a little familiar to you. It's the same way, like if you turn an assignment late in math class, it might be deducted 5 percentage points or 10 percentage points. It's kind of that same idea, is that there's this promise of getting this thing to you, and you're going to be charged a little bit more the later it takes you. So for today then, I would go to your assignment on Schoology and I would kind of follow along as with this video, and you can kind of fill them out. You can see that a lot of it is just notes that are filled in for you, and there's a few key definitions that I want you to fill out. But make sure that you're following along so that you can understand what monetary policy is, what are the tools, and what is the difference between contractionary and expansionary. So the first tool that the Federal Reserve has to control the economy is bonds, and it's through a process called open market operations. And really what it is that banks like Chase and PNC and Bank of America buy bonds from the government. And basically what bonds are is basically we or banks or any citizens can loan money to the government. So I don't know, if you're anything like me, my grandma always bought me bonds like for birthdays and graduations when I was younger, and then I could cash them later. So how it works is I can buy a bond for like $50, and then if I wait a whole period of time, and then eventually I could actually get $100 because I'm loaning money to the government and they are happily taking my money. And then eventually I say, all right, I want my money back, and I'm charging the government interest. So that's why you're making more money than you were spending, because you're loaning out that money to the government. They're safe places to put your money, but they don't make you a lot of money. So banks have bonds, and the Federal Reserve can decide either to sell them bonds or it can buy bonds off of them. And this decision-making process of whether they sell or they buy bonds is called open market operations. So the second tool then that the Federal Reserve System has is called reserve requirements. So banks have to keep some amount of cash within their banks. And this is something that, like, when I first learned, it was kind of crazy for me to wrap my head around, is that banks don't have all of the money that's ever been deposited actually in the bank. So when you go and deposit $100, the bank is taking the $100 and doing other things with it. So let's say a bank has $1 million. People have come and deposited a total of $1 million into this bank. And the reserve requirements is the Federal Reserve saying, hey bank, you need to keep this percentage in actually the bank. So let's say if it was 10% and you had $1 million, you had to keep $100,000 in the bank. The other $900,000 the banks are offering out to people as loans, or they're buying bonds or something to help them make a little bit more money and make some profit. The reason why the Federal Reserve has this requirement is that people who are putting their money into a bank need to feel confident that they can get that money back. So if you go and deposit $100 in a bank, they might be doing other things with that money, but if you come back next week, you need to feel confident that you're coming back and you can get that $100 back. If the bank doesn't have your money, you're never going to put your money in a bank ever again, because wouldn't be a trustworthy place to put your money. If depositors don't feel confident that they can get their money, then it causes something that's called a bank run. And you may have seen this before, but if people don't feel confident that their money is going to be kept in the bank, well then they're going to take their money out of the bank and, stuff it in their mattresses or something. And if you've ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life, you've seen a bank run here where the bank doesn't have the cash to give the people, but the people are requesting that they take their money out anyway. Here's a clip from that.
I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Hey, lady, you got any money in the bank? You better hurry.
George, let's not stop. Let's go.
A minute there. Uh-oh.
Please, let's not stop, George.
I'll be back in a minute, Mary.
Well, hello, everybody. Miss Thompson, how are you? Charlie, what's the matter here? Can't you get in?
I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here. Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
For 60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares.
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you got.
50 cents on the dollar?
Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this thing.
Okay, Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Better to get half than nothing.
That's what I need.
Randall, now, Randall, wait a minute. Now, wait. Now, listen. Now, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets a hold of this building and loan, there'll never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank, he's got the bus line, he got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple. Because we're cutting in on his business, that's why. And because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent he decides. Joe, you had one of those Potter houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he charged you for that broken-down shack? Here, Ed, you remember last year when things weren't going so well and you couldn't make your payments? Well, you didn't lose your house, did you? You think Potter would have let you keep it? Can't you understand what's happening here? Don't you see what's happening? Potter isn't selling, Potter's buying. And why? Because we're panicky and he's not, that's why. He's picking up some bargain. Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But my husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay. I need cash.
I can't keep my kids on faith. I've got to have...
How much do you need?
Hey! I got $2,000. Here's $2,000. This will tide us over to the bank reopens. All right, Tom, how much do you need?
$242.
No, Tom, just enough to tide you over until the bank reopens.
I'll take $242.
There you are.
That'll close my account.
Your account's still here. That's a loan. Okay. All right, Ed.
Well, I got $300 here, George.
All right, now, Ed, what'll it take until the bank opens? What do you need?
Well, I suppose $20?
$20. Now you're talking. Thanks, Ed. That's fine. All right, now, Miss Thompson, how much do you want?
But it's your own money,
Now,
George.
never mind about that. How much do you want now?
I can get along with 20, all right.
$20, fine.
And I'll sign the
Yeah.
paper.
You don't have to sign anything. I know you. You pay when you can. That's okay. All right, Miss Davis.
Could I have $17.50?
That's your heart. Of course you can have it. You got 50 cents?
So the Federal Reserve has the authority to tell banks how much money they have to keep within their banks. So recently, earlier in 2020, it was 10%. However much money a bank had, they needed to keep 10% within the bank. They recently changed that in light of everything that's going on, but we'll get back to that tomorrow. For the third tool that the Federal Reserve can use to control the economy, let's first talk about the role of banks in our society. So let's say you're looking to buy a car. If you're anything like me, you're looking for the most dependable yet cheapest car that you can find. My car is one of those, and to be honest, I paid about $12,000 for my car, but I didn't have just $12,000 sitting around, so I had to go to a bank and get a loan so that they could pay for the car, and then I would agree to pay back the bank. But, of course, I would have to pay interest on that loan because if the bank gave me $12,000 and then I gave them $12,000 right back, well, then they wouldn't be making any money. So when I make my car payment every month, part of the money that I'm paying is going towards that original $12,000 for my car, but part of it is also going towards interest. So by the time that my car is completely paid off, I will have actually paid more than $12,000 because I will have paid the $12,000 for the actual car plus all of the interest that I was charged. How much interest I get charged depends on the bank. So you can imagine if there's a lower interest rate, that's going to be the bank that I'm going to want to go to. So here's me searching for, what bank I want to go with to pay my car, who's going to give me the loan. And you can see there's different interest rates for different banks. The Federal Reserve can't tell banks what interest rate to charge. But remember that the Federal Reserve is like the big bank for the other banks. It's where PNC and Chase and Bank of America, it's where they go to get their money. So the Federal Reserve can change their interest rates, and that can determine how banks change their interest rates for us. And this is called the discount rate. So if the Federal Reserve wants it to be easy for banks and for regular consumers to be borrowing money, then they're going to lower the interest rates, because banks then are going to be charged a lower interest rates when they borrow from the Federal Reserve. So that means we're going to be charged lower interest rates when we borrow from the banks. And then the opposite is true. If the Federal Reserve wants to slow down the economy, get money out of the system, they're going to raise their interest rates. That means that banks probably aren't going to borrow as much from the Federal Reserve, which means the banks are going to raise their rates, which means we're going to be less likely to borrow from the banks. I know that this is all a lot, and that these are a lot of new terms and just new institutions and new ways of thinking about kind of how the economy works. I'm going to insert right here a crash course review that is going to be helpful, I think, to you to reviewing the 3 tools. And then after today, then your assignment on Schoology is just to complete those notes and to look through. Then you should be paying attention to what expansionary and contractionary monetary policy looks like. It has the same goals as expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy, but the ways that they do it are differently. Tomorrow we're going to take a closer look at expansionary monetary policy, because that's what the Federal Reserve is doing right now in the midst of this economic crisis. But today your task is to just know those 3 tools. If you can define those 3 tools after watching this video, then you are good.
But how does a central bank change the money supply? In the US, there are 3 main ways. Let's go to the thought bubble.
When you deposit money in a bank, the bank holds a portion of deposits and loans the rest out. This is called fractional reserve banking. The fraction of deposits the banks are required to hold in reserves is conveniently called the reserve requirement. The first way the Fed can change the money supply is by changing that requirement. Decreasing the reserve requirement will increase the money supply, and increasing the reserve requirement decreases the money supply. The Fed is the banker's bank, so if a commercial bank needs money, they can borrow from the Fed. The second thing the Fed can do to change the money supply is to change the interest rate that it charges banks. That interest rate is called the discount rate. Decreasing the discount rate will make it easier for banks to borrow, and that'll increase the money supply. Increasing that rate will decrease the money supply. The third way to change the money supply is difficult because it requires Janet Yellen to get approval from the Illuminati, the secret cabal that runs the world. Nah, I'm just kidding. The third method is called open market operations. This is when the Federal Reserve buys or sells short-term government bonds. Now, a government bond, or something called a treasury bill, is an IOU issued by the government that says, I'll pay you back later. Banks hold those bonds because they earn interest and are generally less risky than stocks. If the Fed buys these previously issued government bonds from a bank, it increases that bank's liquidity and increases the money supply. If the Fed issues more bonds, the banks will have less liquidity and less money to loan out, and that'll decrease the money supply. And in the US, deciding how many bonds to buy and sell is done by the Federal Open Market Committee.
So if you've watched this video now, if you've just watched that crash course review and you've completed your notes, then you are done for today. Thank you as always for your hard work. Thank you. Good luck, work hard, stay safe, and stay awesome, everybody.